You know, I do quite a few of these interviews, and normally people just jump on me for Fela. Okay, Fela was a very important part of my life, it's true. But there was a whole stack of stuff happening in my life before Fela came along. Generally to do with music, you know. I've been doing this music for, I don't know, it must be 50-something years now. And I resolved many years ago that I would do in my life that which I love. And I feel kind of good about the fact that I stuck to that. But when I was, let me see, when I was 15, 16, I hired a hall near to where I live in a place called Redbridge, the suburbs of London. The Crystal Ballroom, it was called, this place. It was over a car showroom. And I used to hire jazz musicians to come and play. Johnny Dankworth, Bill Lesage, Roy East, Brian Brockle, Hurst. I mean, these are all, you know, kind of big names in jazz at that time. And I ran that for quite some time. But I was always kind of looking at, you know, music as something that I wanted to explore. And then I had a coffee bar at one point, and there was a band called Bubbles and the Outriggers that used to stop and have a coffee on their way back from a gig, on their way back to where they lived in Southend-on-Sea. And anyway, cut a long story short, I finished up managing this band. So one day they came all excited. Oh, we met this big promoter. And at the time, oh, right, sorry, I missed a bit. A friend of mine was working for Radio Caroline. Radio Caroline was a radio station on a boat. And it was in the North Sea, just outside of territorial waters. So it was a pirate radio station called Radio Caroline. And I was fed up with fighting with drunks on Saturday night in my coffee bar. And he said, hey, look, why don't you come and join us? And I found myself in this building in Mayfair, full of young aristocrats that were working for this visionary called Ronan O'Rahilly, who had started this thing. I think he thought he was Kennedy. He even had a bust of Kennedy on his desk. And so I ran something called Spectre Promotions, which was set up to promote the name Caroline. And I put together the first traveling discotheque. And we used to travel to ballrooms and clubs around England, putting on a dance competition, mime competition. I remember the first record I introduced, it was Roy Orbison singing Pretty Woman, but I said Roy Woman singing Pretty Orbison. Kind of screwed it up. But we used to play the Temptations, you know, the Supremes, all of that was the stuff that was happening at that time. And anyway, so now I'm going to go meet this big promoter that Bubbles and the Outriggers found. And this guy came, so I arranged to meet him at Caroline House, Radio Caroline's office. And it was lunchtime, and Ronan O'Rahilly had gone out. So I saw him in Ronan O'Reilly's office, which was this 100 yards of pale green carpet that you had to tread across before you reached his desk. So the guy, you know, he thought I was a big promoter, and I thought he was a big promoter. We later found out neither of us had a pot to piss in. But anyway, at the time, he said, I didn't speak French at that time. I'd got 4% in my French examination at school. So I had, the guy who used to drive my truck when we were on tour did speak French, so he was translating for us. And anyway, cut another long story short, we got on great. He looked like, you know, Laurel and Hardy. I can't remember which is the fat one, but anyway, I think it was Hardy. He looked like Hardy, and very jovial guy. And he invited Bubbles and the Outriggers to come and perform in his club in Belgium. And that was my first trip out of the United Kingdom, so I was kind of excited, you know. Anyway, off we all went to Belgium, and he had a club called the 20 Club in this small town on the French border. And you'd see girls coming over from France with their long black dress on, winding up their dress so that by the time they reached 20 Club, it would be mini dress, you know. And anyway, I had a ball. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. And I got on very well with Jean, who was the guy that invited us. And he said, why don't you come live here? And we'll work together. I said, okay. So I left England and moved to Moucron, this tiny town on the French border. And we used to bring English rock and roll bands over to tour in Europe. The Kinks, the Yardbirds, the Animals, Moody Blues. I did Jimi Hendrix' first European tour. You know, I used to come to England and go around the agents, see what they had. And this agent said, yeah, I got this guy, eats his guitar. And showed me a photograph of Jimi Hendrix. And I knew the photographer, so I called the photographer. I said, hey, is this? He said, no, Rikki, this guy is really good, you know. So I booked him. And this was, let's say this was in November. I booked him for March to come and do 5 shows in Belgium and France. And by the time March came, Hey Joe was #1 in the charts. And they didn't want to come because they were #1 in the charts. I knew a guy in the office. I said, screw you. You would have been happy to come and get the £500 I was going to pay you for these 5 shows. Were it not for the fact you were #1. And they said, oh, okay. So they agreed to come. So I said, better do something special here. So I hired a Chevrolet so that he would feel a bit at home, you know. And he arrived and we got on like a house on fire. And he was a beautiful guy. He was a horny bastard. He was worse than Fela. No, he couldn't be worse than Fela. He was, they used to queue up for a little bit of time with Mr. Hendrix. Anyway, all that went very well. And I was, let me see. Then, okay, I was in France and a friend of mine had just come back from Morocco. And he said, Rikki, you need to come to Morocco. I said, yeah, okay, I'll go. And he said, no, you need to go to Morocco. I said, okay. But I'm broke, so if I got some money, The next day, this is a singer called Ronnie Bird, who was his claim to fame was Françoise Hardy. I don't know if that name means anything to you here, but she was a big star in France, was his girlfriend. Anyway, he came in with a block of notes and banged them on the table and said, go. I missed out a bit, which was that when I arrived in France, there was a guy called Jean Bouquin, who was a couturier, used to make clothes for Brigitte Bardot and all those people. And he was putting a festival together. So I went and found him and I said, do you know what you're doing? He said, no, I don't. Do you? I said, yeah, I do, man. He said, come. So we put this event together and I called the Grateful Dead. And I brought the Grateful Dead from San Francisco to come and be in this free festival just outside Paris. And but that's another long story. I won't get into that. But one of the guys with the Grateful Dead, a guy called Ron Rakow, used to come to Europe every summer and he'd buy a sports car, drive it around Europe, have fun, and then he'd take it back to California and he'd sell it, and the profit would cover the cost of his trip. So he said, I just bought a car, do you want to come around with it? I said, okay. So he bought a red Ferrari, right? And we thundered around France in this red Ferrari until we came to a bend, and the bend turned around and the road went, became a bridge, and we just drove straight into the bridge. So this Ferrari was mashed up big time. And I just stood there looking at it. I said, listen, and it was quite near Marseille. So I said, Ron, I'll see you later, mate. Because I'm not a mechanic, there's nothing I could do. So I went and I got on a boat in Marseille to Tangiers. I got off in Tangier. You know, I always felt when I was a kid like a stranger in a strange land. I can't explain why. I couldn't articulate my reasons for feeling that way, but I nevertheless felt that way. I put my foot on this Africa and I said, aha. I can't explain, it was just conviction, you know. I literally put my foot on Africa and I said, mm-hmm. I had long hair at that time. I went straight to a barber and I cut my hair. Not to disguise myself, it just seemed like an appropriate thing to do there in Tangiers. So I booked into a hotel and I went wandering around. I went in this cafe and there was a couple sitting next to me, a young American couple. And we started chatting and they said, oh, where are you staying? I said, oh, hotel just. They said, oh, we've just rented a big house. Come and stay with us. We've got loads of room. So I went and checked out of the hotel, and next thing I'm in this beautiful house on the cliff top with the waves crashing against the rocks below and palm trees in the courtyard and everything. And the next day, they said, we're going to visit a friend. Would you like to come? I said, okay. And I went with them to the Medina, arrived at a house. We climbed up and up and up right onto the roof. On the roof was a guy with his back to us in a jalaba painting, oil painting, or whatever it was. He was painting anyway. The guy turned around, looked at me, he said, oh, where you be? I wait you long time. I said, well, I got here as fast as I could. The guy said, wait, and he ran downstairs and he ran back up with his vinyl record cover, shoved it in my hands, and it said, Brian Jones plays with the pipes of Pan of the master musicians of Jujuka. I said, oh, okay. I turned the thing over and I read the sleeve notes on the back. When I was living in Oregon, I had a kind of a commune in Oregon, because I lived in America for about 3 years before all this. And we used to put out something called the Atlantis Almanac every month, and we just distribute them. And every month I used to take a myth or a legend, and I'd taken one on the great god Pan, you know, who was a mischievous deity, you know, with the cloven hooves, a bit of a devil, a little devil. And I thought about where would Pan live? Well, he'd live in the mountains because he liked it up high. There'd be running water, there'd be lots of pretty girls because he liked that, and there'd be lots of music. And I built a scene of this village where Pan lived. I'm standing on this rooftop in Tangiers. I'm reading, as if I'd written it, a description of a village where these master musicians of Jujuka lived. I said, ah. I looked at the guy, I said, are you telling me? He said, yes. I said, and you mean we can? He said, yes. The next day, I'm in this van with this guy who's like one of those people, you know, it's like a force of nature. He said, the people, they sleeping. My job is to wake them. Beep, beep, beep. Anyway, we thundered across Morocco until we arrived at a place called Kazal Kabir. We went off the road to kind of a settlement where I had to meet the Qaid to register my presence in that vicinity. He was a study in navy blue, man. He had navy blue everything, navy blue, even navy blue sunglasses. And anyway, I signed the book and off I went up this mountain. We got to the top of the mountain in this van, got to the top, and there was a cloud of little boys who ran through the village with us. We arrived at this long, low building, and all these people came tumbling out. Short ones, fat ones, thin ones, long ones, big ones, all wearing these kind of rough woolen jalabas and gleaming white turbans. And they all ushered me in to the house, sat me down, gave me mint tea, they gave me a keef pipe, and there was this just wonderful atmosphere of, you know, bonhomie, you know, everybody was happy. Then somebody picked up a little flute and started to play. Somebody else picked up another flute, and somebody picked up a little hand drum, started to play. And the thing just built up and built up. And I stood up and I danced like I never danced in my life. And then I flopped down next to this huge guy, like Obelix. I don't know if you're familiar with Asterix, but anyway, Obelix fell in a vat of magic potion when he was a baby and was immensely strong. I flopped down next to Malam Fadal, who said to me, welcome home. This is your home now. You can come, you can go, you can do anything you want, but always there'll be a place for you here. Now this is in Arabic, man, and I just arrived 3 days earlier, and I didn't speak a word of Arabic, but I understood everything that he said. And I tore up my ticket. My return ticket to England, I tore it up and threw it in the bin, man. And I stayed there for 2 years with those people. I left school when I was 15, and I consider my time in that village to be my formal education. That was university for me. They don't tell you anything, they show you. And if you see it, you saw it. And if you didn't see it, you didn't see it. If you saw it, they say, oh, thank God for that. I've maintained relations with those people. That was in 1970. 1980, I went back. I went back to that village. I got passports for everybody. I bought a bus that was always breaking down with this mad French driver. And I toured them 3 months around Europe, the 35 of them. The contract said that we had to be given a live sheep or goat every day and a sack of vegetables, right? Anyway, the tour was successful. It was a mixture of pain and pleasure, as most of those things are. But 10 years ago, then let's jump to about just a bit less than 10 years ago, I met this young Irish guy who'd been doing exactly the same job with exactly the same musicians that I was doing 40 years ago. And when I toured them, I opened the tour on Worthy Farm, which is where Glastonbury Festival is held. But it was before it was a festival. And I thought, okay. So I called, because I was involved, after that visit to Worthy Farm, the farmer told me that he wanted to launch Glastonbury Festival, and he said, would you like to help? So right through the 80s, I was involved with Glastonbury Festival, which is now 170,000 people go to Glastonbury Festival. Anyway, I called them and I arranged for Jajuka to come 35 years later. And we actually opened the festival on the main stage. And then last year, I took them to the Villa Medici in Rome, which is a French enclave right on top of Rome. It's a beautiful kind of palace that Napoleon bought off the Medicis. I think they were skint at the time. And he turned it into, I think he turned it into a Club Mediterranee where you could go and do yummy, 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 yummy. But anyway, every year they used to put on a festival, and I'd taken an Algerian artist that I work with called Rashid Taha, and I told the director, I got friendly with the director, and I told him about Jajuka, so he said, oh, next year bring them. So I brought them to the Villa Medici, and we did a beautiful show there. A few months ago, I took them to the Centre Pompidou in Paris, which is a beautiful museum, and they performed there. And last week, I was supposed to take them, but they went to Japan, to a festival in Japan. I was supposed to go, I had a ticket and everything, but I was here in Lagos for Celebration. I got on the plane back home, I was fine. I got off the plane, coughing and spluttering. They don't filter the air in those planes, man. And that cough went 3 weeks, man. I couldn't face that 14-hour journey, cough. But anyway, they went, and they were a huge success in this festival. They're all elderly now, but they still blow a storm. Amazing musicians. Yeah, so now, okay, let's back up again. My relationship with this Africa is growing. I learned to respect in Africa. When I went back to England after that 2-year stint in Morocco, I arrived at my parents' front door, and I knock on the door, and my dad opened the door, and I had long hair, but it was in a ponytail, and I had a kind of Zapata mustache. And he said, yes? I said, Dad. He didn't recognize me, man. And he said, oh. Anyway, I kissed my father. And any time I saw my father after that day, I kissed my father. I never used to kiss him before. I learned to respect in Africa. But anyway, now I start moving south. Well, I met Fela. First of all, I just heard the music, and I was just, sometimes you hear something, and it was like he was talking directly to me. It was sorrow, tears, and blood. Everybody run, run, run. Everybody scatter, scatter. Some people lost some bread. Someone nearly died. Someone just died. Police, they come. Army, they come. Confusion everywhere. 7 minutes later, all down, cool down, brother. Police don't go away. Army don't disappear. Them leave sorrow, tears, and blood. So I did some research, and because I didn't know anything about Fela, and I wanted to meet him. At the time, I was putting together a rainforest festival. I wanted to invite artists from all the rainforest countries in the world and people to talk about the issues of deforestation, because it seemed to be very important to do so. I had a site, which was Nebworth Park, which is a beautiful stately home park. I had a license, and I had Guinness ready to put up the bread. And I wanted Fela to join my board of advisors and, of course, come and play at the festival. So I put together a beautiful leather-bound proposal, and I went and knocked on the door. It was in the winter, and I had a hat and a coat and a scarf. And he used to leave the key in the outside. Come in. So I went inside, and the room was hot, man, because he used to carry extra heaters in addition to whatever was provided. The room was full of beautiful girls. Fella sitting there in his Speedos. So my hat came, the coat, and the scarf, and I didn't get down to my Speedos, but I sat down next to him, and I gave him this proposal, and he was looking through, and I was talking into his ear. I don't remember what I said. I don't know. I said something, and he just turned around and looked at me. We both started to laugh. And in that moment, we just became friends. And it was a friendship that was to endure for the rest of his life. At the time, he had a manager. He had a manager called Francis Katekian, who was a French guy. And when somebody like me turns up, when you're on the road, when somebody like me turns up, you say, who the hell is this? Which is exactly what happened. But to cut another long story short, we became friends. And then Fela started calling me, come. So after I was working on this festival, so I'd finish work and I'd go to the hotel, which was fortunately quite near to my office. And we'd eat together, and then we'd chat. And about 2 o'clock, I said, anyway, Fela, he said, no, Rikki, there's this thing I want to tell you. I'd stagger out of there 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. He was okay, he'd sleep all day. I go home, shower, change my clothes and go back to work. This went on for a week. That was my first week of Fela. And after that, he was calling me all the time, or Francis would call me and ask me to do something for him. And it just gradually developed into a point where Fela asked me if I'd like to come on board as co-manager. So Francis and I were co-managers of Fela. Well, he's been gone 20 years now and he's still keeping me busy. I put out his music worldwide. Francis and I spent a decade digitally remastering his back catalogue. You know, a lot of it was recorded under fairly primitive conditions and lots of clicks and clacks. And we wanted to get rid of all those clicks and clacks, which was a painstaking job because we didn't want to mess with the music. It took us 10 years. We could do 10 minutes a day properly. And so that's why it took us 10 years. But anyway, at a point, we were at the Midem, you know, which is a trade fair, music business trade fair in the south of France, in Cannes. And we met somebody from Motown. And played them some of the stuff that we'd done. We were in the middle of it at that time, and they were just, wow, going crazy. Next thing, Gerald Busby, who was the president of Motown, wanted to form an African label. He wanted to call it Taboo. And he said, if I'm going to form an African label, I have to have Fela. So then he heard this work that we'd done, and he was so excited and said, okay. So we said, okay, make us an offer. So they made us an offer, which was pretty good. You know, they wanted a 5-record deal. I think it was $250,000 per record. They wanted to pay us $1 million. They wanted to buy the back catalog for $1 million. Plus $50,000 tour support, plus publishing, plus, you know, there was it was a lot of money. So, okay, so we sent the news of this down to Fela. This was in, what year was it? 92, I think. I think it was 92, 93. Fela said, okay, tell them to come back in April 95. Huh? I said, what? Why? I said, well, I don't know, maybe he's having difficulty with the idea of selling his life's work, because he hasn't got a phone, so I can't ask him directly. I only got the message I got. Maybe he doesn't understand why you've got to recoup before he sees any royalties. You've got to get back your money before he sees any royalties. So they went away and they came back and they said, okay, royalties from record 1 sold. I said, okay, we'll send that message. We sent the message down to Fela. Fela came back and said, okay, tell him to come back in April 95. At which point I jumped on a plane to Lagos and went to Fela's house, and he said, oh, Rikki, bring Rikki the food you like. Oh. So finally I said, Fela, why? He said, Rikki, the spirits told me so. So what are you supposed to say to somebody who says that to you? I said, okay, Fela, if I was to put a letter together which said that along the broad lines of the head of agreement, you were ready to sign with Motown, but that for personal reasons you're unable to do so until April 95, will you sign it? He said, yeah. So I went to Becco's office and banged out this letter and came back and he signed it. And I sent the letter off by DHL to Los Angeles. And then time went by and our lawyers started talking to their lawyer and the thing was going backwards and forwards. In April '95, the contract was ready for signature. Gerald Busby was sacked. The new guy that came in, his name was Andre Hurrell, who used to be head of Uptown Music. We needed downtown music, man. His first act as president of Motown was to ditch Axe, Taboo. And the other thing that happened was that while Timmy Regisford, the guy that Gerald Busby had sent to Lagos to meet Fela, and Fela didn't like meeting record company executives particularly, but Timmy was a pretty cool guy. While he was here, he signed Femi, and they made this record. They took him off, I don't think they took him to New York, but anyway, made this record, which was his first record. It's like, it was just like this frantic music. But anyway, that Taboo was gone, man. So the record, which was about to come out, was through the floorboards. And the poetic justice of all this is that we later licensed, on behalf of the family, licensed that catalog to Universal, who own Motown. So my own view is that Fela wanted to leave that body of work to his children. That's my own conviction. He wasn't much of a dad, you know. He was a wonderful man and I loved him dearly, but he was a crap dad. But that was something I'm sure was in his mind. So in 1999, we licensed that catalog. We got $1 million for the family, and each took their share, and Femi Yeni and Sola's share and the Mama share was used to build that extraordinary new Africa Shrine, that beautiful building that's there. So I kind of feel good about that. I love that place. And I come to Celebration whenever I can. And I organize celebrations in London as well. I have a 17-piece Afrobeat orchestra led by Deleuze Shosimi, who used to be Fela's keyboardist. And then I invite a dozen or so artists to come get up and sing a Fela song, either together or singly. And I've been doing that for quite some years. I didn't do one this year, but I came to Celebration here, which was great. I loved it. And will continue to do so. But meanwhile, a new venture was started about a year ago. There's a website called okayafrica.com, okayafrica.com, that deals with music, fashion, social commentary, articles about things that are happening. It could be anywhere in Africa. There's a page where it's got all the African countries. You can click on any country and it'll tell you something about what's going on. Anyway, it's very intelligently curated, as a consequence of which is very popular. And it was started by, Questlove, the drummer of The Roots, so that guy with the big afro and a comb sticking in it, started something called OK Player, which is a socially conscious hip-hop site that is now fantastically popular. And our main investor invested into OK Player at the time that, you know, I got an email one day. I'm a self-appointed guardian of Fela's legacy because he was my friend and I loved him dearly. As a consequence of which, all kinds of things come through the door. And I got an email one day I want to do a musical about Fela on Broadway. I said, I can't explain, I mean, it didn't really register. Fortunately, so I didn't mind him. Fortunately, he insisted. And I said, okay, have you got a treatment? And he said, yes, and the treatment arrived. And the first thing I saw was the name Bill T. Jones, Bill T. Jones. And I was impressed. Bill T. Jones is an African-American choreographer whose work is always to do with something, some issue, and he's a powerful guy, powerful. And he has all those Rockefellers, all those people supporting him. He can fill theaters all over the world. And I used to manage, actually at the same time I was managing Fela, Le Ballet Africain, the national dance company of Guinea, that I managed for 12 years and carted 42 of those people around the world, playing in, 3,000 to 5,000 capacity venues. So I knew the dance world, and that's why I recognized who was Bill T. Jones. Then I read the thing, and it was pretty good, So I was on tour with Rashid Taha in America, and I arranged to meet this guy. And the guy came in, and the first thing he said to me was, and he's a kind of ordinary-looking guy, he said, I consider Fela to be the most important musician of the 20th century, alongside Shostakovich. And I want to do this thing. Will you help? And sometimes somebody says something to you that you know is not a joke. And I said, of course. So after that, I was bouncing backwards and forwards from London to New York, doing workshops, gathering people together. I had to bump heads with Mr. Jones quite a bit because he didn't know Fela, but he was a brilliant director and choreographer. Until one day I said to him, Bill, what about the underground spiritual game? And he said, I said, sit down. Because that was what it was all about with Fela. When Fela played in the shrine, in the original shrine, nobody applauded Fela. Nobody applauded. Why? Because you, as a member of the audience, were playing the underground spiritual game, which is the music comes off the stage, it reaches you, you absorb that music, you send it back. I'm not talking about going and clapping, I'm talking about you send it back. When the wave comes back to the stage, the whole thing goes to that place where I would like to live the rest of my life. That stuff now comes back into the audience. And the nature of that stuff is that when you leave, you can take it with you, the energy that you get, and spend it elsewhere, which is actually a definition of protein. You eat and you do. Here you've got this thing, you go out and you can use it. So, in fact, the audience is a protein factory. Excuse me. I've forgotten where I was.
With Steve. You'd met Steve.
Oh, right.
The new...
Yeah, right. So we then went into a theatre, off-Broadway, a small theatre. Full cast, full band, full tech, full every damn thing for 3 months, putting the show together. And then at a point decided that it was okay, it was ready, and we opened in this same theatre. After a few days, I saw in the interval Questlove. And I said, and I knew he was a Fela fan, so I said, hey, Amir, you made it. Are you going to help us with this? The guy ran home and did a blog, and he knows everybody. And he said, I went to see Fela tonight. Someone asked if I would help. He had me with hello. And then he said, the only excuse for not going to see this play is if you're dead. And 3 days later, we had Beyonce, Jay-Z, Alicia Keys, David Byrne, they all came. And Steve Hendel, the guy who had written to me in the first instance, and who was the producer of the show, developed a relationship with Jay-Z, and Jay-Z then brought in Will Smith, and they actually invested. They put $3 million inside the thing, but more importantly, the poster said, Sean, Jay-Z, Carter, and Will and Jada Pinkett Smith present Fela. Because a lot of people didn't know Fela, you know? And, but they know those guys, so they'd say, I don't know who is Fela, but if those guys rate this, let's go check it out. And we played to 500,000 people on Broadway. And we played to another 500,000 people when we toured the show around America. And at the same time as the show was on in New York, Nicholas Heitner, the artistic director of the National Theatre in London, came to New York and saw the show and said, I want this show. So we opened a second production of Fela in London at the National Theatre, and it was sold out from day one to the end. Another person that came to see the show in New York was Governor Tinubu. And Governor Tinubu, who was a friend of Beko, so after Fela died, Beko became protector, I suppose you could say, of Sheun, the youngest son. And so for Sheun, Tinubu was uncle. So Sheun said, Uncle, when you're in New York, make sure you see the Fela show. So he saw the Fela show, and when he came back, he said, oh, it's good, I liked it. He said, okay, Uncle, bring it now. So that was how it came to pass that I brought 40 tons of equipment and 80 people from New York to this Lagos to present Fela, which was amazing. You know, when you put on a show like that in New York, it's a story. In Lagos, it's history, particularly for younger people. I mean, everybody knows Fela, but they don't necessarily know that much about him. And this play told his story, so it was hugely successful. And for the audience, for the performers, it was a kind of a shock because they knew the words to all the songs. So they'd sing them in full voice and in tune, which was kind of, you know, Palava, and the whole audience, he go get, would come roaring back at you. Wow, that was quite an experience for everybody. And it was like we brought Fela home. It was a challenge, you can imagine, the challenge of coming to the land of lastminute.com with all of this. But we pulled it off against all the odds. Which is maybe the spirit of Fela operating. You know, he could not allow that not to work properly. But anyway, whatever the case, I've been coming to this place for 35 years, and you know, you look at the music scene and you see the Davidos and the Wizkids and the Olamides, and you know, I'm aware of the fact that it's the tip of the iceberg, that underneath there's this seething mass of talent struggling to find its way out. And because, so going back quickly, we made Questlove an associate producer of the play. And then when we became aware of OK Player, some investment was made into OK Player. And then the decision was made, this is 6 years ago, to start OK Africa, which is now, as I explained, very popular. 5 years ago, there was a knock on my front door. I knew they were coming, but there was a knock on my front door, and there was a whole contingent of people from Nigeria, and it was the director or the producer of the All Africa Music Awards, yet to be, who came to ask me if I would be prepared to act as their international advisor. And I looked at the guy and I knew this was going to be a packet of wahala, you know, but I liked it. I liked the sincerity of creating an All Africa Music Awards ceremony, let's call it. And the first year was a shambles. The second year was a lot better. The third year was even better still. And there was one last Sunday, which is why I'm sitting here in Nigeria, because I came back for the 4th edition of the All African Music Awards. But anyway, I was going through the a year or a bit more than a year ago, I was going through the winners and nominees, or the nominees and winners over the last 3 years. And I see names, I didn't know who this was, who's that? And I go on YouTube, check it out. I go, hit, 10 million hits. So in other words, artists who are solid in their own territory, but totally unknown elsewhere. And I've sat down with Nigerian artists and said, sorry to tell you this, but nobody knows you. And the guy looked at me, what do you mean? I perform in London, I perform in New York. I say, yes, to Nigerians. There's a whole world out there. And the music, a lot of the music that I'm listening to is good. I like it. I don't necessarily like the fact they stuck an S on the end of Afrobeats, which I find intolerable. But it was a marketing ploy. I mean, I know that. But some of the music is good, and so my response to this was to say, okay. So I and Abiola Oke, who's the CEO of Oke Africa, based in New York, sat down and planned to create and have created Oke Music, O-K-A-Y Music. And you can check out the website, okmusic.com. And we started a year ago this month. And we've signed DJ Spinall, we signed Adekunle Gold, we signed Niola, we signed Tubaba, and a bunch of young up-and-coming artists, not just from Nigeria, but also from Tanzania, like Vanessa Mdee, people from Kenya, Uganda, Cameroon. We had 6 nominees in this year's All African Music Award, AFRIMA, which happened last weekend. And our artist won 2. A girl from Cameroon won the best female artist from Central Africa, and Tubaba won the raga dancehall. I don't quite know, I don't see it as really that raga dancehall, but anyway, he won. I was invited to, I arrived here on Friday morning. My plane arrived at 6 o'clock, and at 9 o'clock there was a music business round table, and I was one of the panelists on this. And it was very nice. There were 300 or 400 people there, and we had a good panel and had a good discussion. Lots of questions were asked and answered. I stepped off the stage, and they were coming at me from every direction, artists, managers, producers, and I just gave them all my cards and said, send me music. So all this music has been arriving. My computer is full of music. And then they call up and say, do you like my music? And I go, I can't remember which one it is. But amongst the music I've listened to so far, and I haven't heard everything, there are several artists that I'm ready and will sign to our digital music service because it's good. It's good music, man. So that's the path that we're pursuing now. That's where we want to go. I want to make this music available worldwide to a wider audience, put it that way. And not just outside Africa, but inside Africa as well. We've done reciprocal deals with companies in Senegal, whereby they're going to give us their music and we're going to give them our music. We're doing the same arrangement in Uganda and Kenya, and here in Nigeria. We're doing a deal with Spinlet, where they're going to give us their music and we're going to give them ours. So we'll end up with a situation where, you know, music is easily transferable, using the power of, okay, Africa to let people know. Because one thing to put it up on the system, which is what TuneCore and CD Baby and many other aggregators are able to do. They can get it out onto exactly the same platforms as us, but they don't do anything. And we have, okay, Africa, we also now are building the social media connections for OK Music, which obviously Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and etc. The website, which is okmusic.com, which curates every artist who's signed to us with their video, if they have a video, with their biography, with photographs, and extracts from their music so that you can listen to and then download if you want to. You buy what you're hearing in a wide variety of currencies. We also have a YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/official OK Music. Check it out. And we also attained Apple Music Curator status, which means that every Friday we're able to post playlists on Apple Music, which will be artists that are signed to us and music that we love as well. So, you know, we're not too fussy in that regard. We're quite happy to put on, you know, the latest Burna Boy track or Wizkid or... so that, in a kind of little neat nutshell, is this Rikki's story, I guess. Up to date. Here I am, coming back again. Every time I get on the plane to come back here, I'm happy. I love this crazy place, man. Sometimes I ask myself, why the hell do I love this place the way I do? But the fact is, I do, and I will, like Zorro, I will return.